you doing today? This is Dr. Adeshina from ftplectures.com. I'll be talking to you about applying to medical school in the United States. So, you're an applicant, and you've completed all your prerequisites for medical school. You've taken your physics, your chemistry, your biology. You've taken your organic chemistry. You've taken all these pre-medical classes, and it's time to apply to medical school. Just like you, I was in your shoe a few years ago, and I had to make this decision. And a lot of students every year get confused. Where should I apply to? I'm hearing all these different schools I can apply to. Where do I begin? Well, today I'm going to shed some light on how to make some decisions and how to approach applying to different medical schools and actually understand the different kind of medical schools and different career options that's actually out there for students interested in going to medicine. So, when I was applying to medical school, I was like, I just want to be a doctor. I want to be an excellent doctor. I want to be able to take good care of my patients. And that was my goal. And then I ran into something new that I've never heard before. That there's actually 3 ways you can become a doctor in the United States. The first one is you can go to an MD school. This is a school where they offer degrees in Doctor of Medicine. And then there's another option. So you can go to a DO school, which is Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. And also, you can also come from an IMG, International Medical Graduate, by going to the Caribbean, where they also give MD degrees similar to the Doctor of Medicine. So these are all your options when you are applying to medical school in the United States. Well, as an applicant, a pre-med applicant that has no idea what's really going on in the field of medicine, it gets very difficult to know which pathway should I take. Most students know about Doctor of Medicine. Some or most people also have heard about Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. And also, a lot of people have probably heard about schools in the Caribbean, which is another option. So what I'm going to do today is talk about what are the differences and the similarities between all these degrees, and also how applicants are gauged and how these schools' philosophy differs, and which is what makes them give out different degree options. So let's start with the first one. MD schools. In the United States, we have about 126 MD medical schools in the US. And we have about 29 schools in the United States that give out the degree Doctor of Osteopathic Medicine. And we have a lot of schools also in the Caribbean that will give out that give out MD degrees in the Caribbean islands. There's different ones, which I am not 100% familiar with, but I do know a couple of them. There's Ross School of Medicine, there's St. George's, there's one in Antigua, and the list goes on and on and on. The most important part is these schools just have to be accredited by a United States institution and recognized in the US. That's the most important thing. So now that we know how many schools we can actually apply to, let's look at the similarities between getting an MD degree and a DO degree. MD students go to a 4-year rigorous, extremely rigorous, just as DO students also go through extremely rigorous medical education. So these are going to be similarities. Four years of medical school. So we're going to link this together. Also, the same goes for IMGs. They go through 4 years of rigorous medical education. Also, another similarity between a doctor that has an MD degree and a DO degree is that these both students that go through these medical schools also can specialize in any specialty. What are the specialties we have in medicine? We have a lot of specialty in medicine. So if you graduate from a medical school and you get an MD degree and a DO degree, you can decide to practice in any specialty you want to. What are the specialties we have? Let's start with primary care. Primary care, and for those who doesn't know what primary care is in the United States, primary care is actually the front line of medicine. These are the doctors that specialize in disease prevention. When we talk about disease prevention in medicine, we talk about chronic medical illnesses that patients have over a long period of time. Let me simplify that for you. So you have an older person which is in their 40s or their 50s, and they have high blood pressure, which we refer to as hypertension. Or they have diabetes. You probably heard of diabetes, right? It's a lifelong illness, right? So patients that have hypertension or diabetes, or they have cholesterol problem, which we refer to as hypercholesterolemia in medicine, you have to manage these patients for the rest of their life, from the day you diagnose the disease to the day they pass away. So that's, if somebody lives up to 100 years old and you meet them when they're 20, 30 years old or 40 years old, you'll be treating them for 60 years. So these patients are going to be seeing primary care doctors. And these primary care doctors are family medicine, pediatrics medicine, and also internal medicine. These are known as the primary care specialties. The primary care specialties. So, a patient that has diabetes will be managed by his family care doctor forever. And also pediatrics, right? When a child is born, has to go to see the pediatrician. These are the doctors that specialize in taking care of babies. So they take care of babies from the time they're like 1 month old up until the time they're 18 years old. So when you're up to 18, your pediatrician is going to be the one taking care of you. Internal medicine doctors can take care of patients older than 18 years old and also adults. So there's an overlap between internal medicine doctors and family medicine doctors. Internal medicine doctors tend to have their own private practice, and also they can also work in the hospital, known as hospitalists. They stay in the hospital for 7 days, and they can work there for extended amount of time, taking care of patients inside the hospital, and they can also have their own group practice. And their population can start from either 18 years old up until 90 years old. This is known as internal medicine. So that's the primary care specialty. So if you're an MD or a DO, you can go into any of the specialties. Also, now we have specialists. If you now want to specialize in medicine, I'm going to combine specialists and also the other rest of the medical careers that you can choose. You can become an emergency medicine physician. You can become a psychiatrist. Somebody that takes care of patients that have mentally challenged problems like depressions or anxiety, psychosis. You can become a specialist in medicine and become, if you're an internal medicine doctor, you can specialize. You can decide to specialize, and this specialist in internal medicine, you can say, I just want to specialize in the heart. And you become a cardiologist. You have to do a fellowship for 3 years. After doing a 3 years internal medicine residency, you can decide, say, I want to specialize in the lungs. You pick an organ system and become a pulmonary or even critical care. They work in the ICU doctor. You can say, I just want to specialize in the bowel, right, in the intestine. So you become a gastroenterologist, GI doctor. You could say, wait a minute, I just want to specialize in the brain. So you become a neurologist. But neurologist is actually a different aspect because you don't have to go through internal medicine to become a neurologist. So we're going to put neurology here. So you become a neurologist and you just specialize in the brain. But neurologist is not the same as a neurosurgeon. Okay? Let's say you want to become a surgeon now. Surgeon, right? You can be a neurosurgeon and specialize in operating on the brain. That's known as neurosurgery. And you can be a general surgeon, or you can be a bariatric surgeon, and you can pick what aspect of surgery you want to specialize in. You want to do breast and mammary surgeon, and those are different specialties under surgery. So aside from this, you can also become an endocrinologist. You just specialize in the thyroid, adrenal problems, diabetes. You manage a lot of thyroid, a lot of endocrine problems in the body. That's an endocrinologist. But remember, you have to go through 3 years of internal medicine before you can become any of this. You can decide to be an infectious disease doctor. You just specialize in microorganisms and how the antibiotics work to kill all these bugs. So these are all the different kind of specialties under internal medicine. You can also decide to become a sports medicine doctor. Sports medicine. And there's 3 ways to become a sports medicine doctor. You go through family medicine, 3 years of family medicine residency, or you go and then you specialize in sports medicine. You can become an emergency medicine doctor and specialize in sports medicine. So you do 3 years or 4 years of emergency medicine, and then you go into sports medicine. And also, you can go through PM&R, which is known as a physiatrist, physical medicine and rehabilitation. So PM&R. Now, if you want to know what PM&R doctors do, they're the guys that specialize in recovery. So a patient has a stroke and they have to recover back. The PM&R doctors are the ones that specialize in getting your muscles and your bones to get moving again. So you go through a lot of rehabilitation. They do a lot more work in that. I'm just giving you an example in this case. Also, you can also decide to work on the eyes and become an ophthalmologist. And just be an ophthalmologist. This is different from optometrists. Optometrists get OD degrees, which is different from DOs, because sometimes people mix that with each other. Optometrists go to optometry school. Doctors of osteopathic medicine go to osteopathic medical school. So ophthalmologist, and it's a surgical specialty. And you can see all the different aspects of medicine you can go into. So you can go also into preventative medicine, which is another aspect of medicine that works with public health related issues with women, general disease prevention and control. That is known as preventative medicine. So as you can see, we've got all these different specialties, and the good news is if you end up going to a MD school or a DO school, you can go to any and become any. And just I almost missed one. You become an obstetrics and gynecologist. These are the doctors that deliver babies. They do surgeries, they do hysterectomies, they take out the uterus if a patient needs to. These are the patients that also follow women to make sure they have their pap smears done, their mammograms done. These are obstetrics and gynecologists. And we also have anesthesiologists, doctors that put you to sleep before surgery. And we have radiologists, are the doctors that read x-rays, CT scans, MRI machines, radiographs, and and also ultrasound. These are all the different kind of doctors that you can be if you end up in 1, 2, or 3. You can end up in any of these specialties as long as you're in the United States and you practice medicine. So we've got a lot of options, right? I've broken down every single specialty you can actually possibly go into, and hopefully I'm actually not missing any of them. Okay, you can also become a urologist. A urologist is a patient that specializes in just prostate and also renal problems. If you go through internal medicine, you can become a nephrologist. And nephro means kidneys. They just specialize on how the kidney works, and they're just a specialist just for the kidneys. Now, just to quickly hint, how many years does it really take to get through all the specialties? Family medicine, 3 years. 3 years is how long it takes to finish family medicine. Pediatrics, 3 years. Internal medicine, 3 years. If you want to specialize, cardiology is 3 years of a fellowship. Pulmonary critical care is actually 2 to 3 years also. GI is 3 years. Endocrine is around 2. Infectious disease around 2 to 3. Nephrology is also around 2 to 3 years, depending. I'm not specifically, I don't know specifics as to nephrology, but I know it's probably a 2 to 3 year fellowship. Emergency medicine, you can go to either a 3 or 4 year residency. Psychiatry is a 4-year residency. Neurology is a 4-year residency. Surgery is a 5 years, but then you want to specialize in a fellowship, it depending. You can spend another 2 to 3 years, depending on what kind of surgeon you want to be. Neurosurgery is 7 years. Sports medicine, 4 years, right? Or either you, you actually do 3 years of family, and you can do either a year or 2 of sports medicine fellowship. PM&R is 4 years. Ophthalmologist is a 5-year specialty. Preventative is combined with family medicine to get a 5-year residency. Obstetrics and gynecologist is 4 years. Anesthesiologist is 4 years. Radiologist is 5 years. Urologist is a 5-year residency. So on average, you see, it takes about 3 to 7 years to complete residency, right? So if you're an MD from the United States or an MD from International Medical School or DO, the similarities means we all complete between 3 to 7 years after 4 years of medical school. Those are the similarities between MDs and DOs. Now, let's talk about what makes this doctors different, right? You know, you go to an MD school, you go to a DO school. What is actually the difference, right? We know the similarities, they both go through 4 years. And also, before we progress, we've got to talk about the MCAT, right? Let's talk about how you get into these schools before we actually proceed. So, in order to get into any of these medical schools, they all require that you take the MCAT, and you have to have a GPA. You have to have a GPA and MCAT to get into these medical schools. Now, I'm going to be very honest with you. Over the last 5 to 10 years, especially in the last 5 years, the amount of applicants that apply to medical school has skyrocketed. Like the amount of students that are interested in becoming doctors have actually exceeded their normal applicant pool. So as the applicant that's watching this video right now, you have to be very realistic to know that you have to be very competitive to get into these medical schools. Now, this used to be the central dogma back in the days, and usually students talk about this, and it's very important that I clarify this. The old central dogma, which is not true anymore, is that if you don't do well on your MCAT, and you can't get into an MD medical school in the United States, you are going to be able to get into a DO schools because they take people that don't do well on the MCAT. That is not true anymore. That used to be what people used to say. But over the last 5 to 10 years, this has changed completely. It is as competitive to get into an MD school in the United States, and it's the same to get into a DO school because it's extremely, extremely competitive. Let me give you some numbers. An MD school can get about 5,000 applicants, and a DO school can get up to 4,000 applicants, and you still have to go through the rigorous process to be able to get into these schools. It is not an easy process, so don't let anybody lie to you. Also, people do say that if you don't do well on the MCAT, you can get into IMG's medical school, which is International Medical Graduate Schools, which are also schools in the Caribbean islands. That it still holds true. So people or applicants that is applying to medical school in the United States that can't get into an MD or a DO school, you can't give up hope. And I don't want you to feel inferior because you're going to be an excellent doctor even when you go to a Caribbean medical school. But we are still going to talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of going to an international medical school. But you still have to understand, if that's your dream and your goal, don't give up. Because don't let these numbers that I'm going to talk about in the next few minutes discourage you from being a doctor, because people that go to international medical school do excellent. They're excellent physicians, just like people that train in the United States. So Let's look at some average numbers of MCAT scores that patients actually, students, I mean to say, use to get into MD schools compared to DO schools. Let's look at GPAs. The average GPA for students going to applying to DO schools is often around 3.4 to 3.5. 3.4 to 3.5. Now remember, that's the word average, right? So let me explain what average means. This is the bell curve for applicants, right? And we have a standard deviation of -2 and +2, right? And the average is in the middle, okay? So when I said the average score that the average GPA for students that are applying to DO schools between 3.4 to 3.5, in an MD schools, it's a little bit, but also around 3.5. So it's pretty much almost the same. Can you see that? Good. Let's take a look at the MCAT scores. The average MCAT score today, right? It's 2012. Today, for students applying to MD schools, is around 29. That's the average MCAT score. For DOs, the average MCAT score for DO schools is around 25 to 29. Now you might say that, oh well, so if I get a 25, I still have a chance of getting to a DO school. Yes, that's still possible. But you can see that as the applicant pool is getting more and more competitive, you do not want to score a 25 and think you're going to get into a DO school. It's like shooting yourself in the foot. Because by the time you look at the applicant pool, majority of the people applying to DO schools have scores around 28, 29, and 30s. So, but at the same time, don't ever get discouraged if you have a lower MCAT score, because take a look at the graph. I said the average MCAT score is a 29, right? Average means the middle. If I take a sample of all the applicants that apply to medical school today, and I divide them by the number of applicants. So if you have 1,000 applicants, and I divide it by the number, and I have 1,000 applicants, which would be N, and I take all the average MCAT scores and I add them all together. So I divide the sum, right? The sum of all their scores, MCAT scores, divided by the number of applicants is around 29, right? Which means that's the average. That means somebody got a 24, a 23, got into medical school, and somebody that had a score higher than 29 that scored a 30, 32, 45, 44, all got into medical school. This is what average scores mean. So as an applicant, don't ever be discouraged by the numbers, because they are very tricky. Now, medical school application is very, very intense, especially when the admissions committee is taking a look at your application. So this is very important that you listen. They always look at your MCAT score and your GPA, and I always advocate to students, make sure you get a higher MCAT score and a higher GPA. The higher the number, the better. But don't ever get discouraged. That's why I made how to get into medical school part 2 video, which you should watch. You know, you can click here if you want to go back and watch the video to notice that this scores doesn't mean you're not going to be a doctor. If you get a lower score than these numbers, that is not a disadvantage, because you've got options. You got 2 options. Retake the MCAT or apply to international medical schools. When you apply to these schools, they have a different philosophy. The philosophy is, we are going to make you a great physician as long as you have the passion and the drive. So we're not going to let numbers determine your goals to become a doctor in life. That is a good thing, because now you can capitalize on that. Because let's say you're just a great test taker, right? And that's, you know, people do have that problems. You know, they're not great test takers, and they've been taking MCAT the first, the second, the third, the fourth time, and they're just sick and tired of taking the test. They've got an option to go to these schools, which take a lower MCAT score, and they can even take a lower GPA, as long as you're willing to work very hard when you get to the medical school and study very well. That is the most important thing, all right? So those are the average scores that MD applicants and DO applicants usually get into medical school. But remember, there's other things they look at. You look at your letter of recommendations, they look at your personal statement, they look at your involvement in the community, they look at your passion and your drive. You still have to go through the interviews. So this is only 2 pieces out of the application process. That is a very important thing you have to know. Now, let's talk about what is exactly the difference between an MD and a DO medical school. So I attended the University of Medicine and Dentistry School of Osteopathic Medicine. I'm a DO and I'm an emergency medicine resident at St. Luke's Hospital. Now, I'm going to show you the path of what led me into osteopathic medicine. I already told you the similarity between an MD and a DO, and I'm going to share with you today what the differences are going to be. The difference between an MD and a DO is basically a philosophy. It's a state of thinking. So let's take a look at an MD school. When you go to a medical school in the United States that give out MD degrees, they focus, right? The philosophy is research. Philosophy. It's a research, scientific research based driven medical school, which means they focus a lot on making sure how do we get the latest discoveries in medicine. For example, how we find the next cure for Alzheimer's, the next cure for disease processes. So, but the doctors that do these are often PhD doctors and also MD doctors. So you can actually become a PhD, MD PhD, which is even offered in MD schools. You can get both degrees, right? It's like a double doctor, but it's a lot of emphasis on research, right? Publication.